Good morning, church. It's good to see everyone. Hey, today we're moving forward in this series. Jesus is answering this question, filling in this blank. Jesus is what? And based on our upbringing, our understanding, how we were raised, things like that, we would all answer this question differently. We started out looking at Jesus' leader, Jesus' grace, last week Jesus' healer, and this morning we're going to answer this question. We're going to fill in the blank one more time. I want to pray for us, and then we're going to go ahead. Father, God, we thank you for the time that we have right now to celebrate who you are. Got to learn a little bit more about what you want from us. Jesus, I pray that as we look at your life, that you will challenge our life. God, I pray that your loudest voice in the room right now, that your spirit will move in ways as it already has begun to through worship. Father, I pray that you'll challenge who we are, challenge what you want us to do. Father, we pray for your word to be alive right now. That's your name we pray. Heard a story this past week about a young woman who brought her fiance home to meet her parents for the first time. Now they sat down, they ate dinner together, and after they ate, the father asked the fiance into his study for a chat. They sat down, the father looked at this young man, he says, so what are your plans? And the fiance, the young man said, well, he said, I'm a theology scholar. The father says, that's admirable. He says, but what will you do to provide a nice home for my daughter? Well, I will study and God will provide. Okay? He said, well, how do you plan to afford to raise children? He said, I believe that God will provide. And they finished their conversation. They walked out. Then the fiance continued to walk into the living room. However, the young lady's mom was standing outside of the study and said to her husband, well, how did that go? He said, well, he has no money and no employment plans. But on the other hand, he thinks I'm God. That God will provide, this idea where God will just take care of things. I remember growing up watching Disney movies, and one of the movies we watched had this character in it. I don't know how many remember this guy. The genie. The genie was in Aladdin. The genie came down and gave Aladdin 3 wishes. However, there were stipulations that came with these wishes. One was he couldn't raise people from the dead. 2, you could not wish for more wishes. And 3 was that he couldn't make anyone fall in love. Anything after that was fair game. And so we got all these wishes. I remember watching this movie and thinking, man, I wonder what life would be like if I had a magic genie. You know, and I started like playing all these scenarios in my head, like, oh, if I had a magic genie, then I could do this, and I could do this, and I could get this. And I mean, looking back at it, really, all those things were completely selfish things. I mean, they were nothing that would be productive in society. You know, wasn't, some like, hey, I wish that you would cure world hunger. No, it was like, oh, if I could get this new bike or something stupid like that. You know, I would have these giant wishes of all of these things. And it was trivial. It meant nothing. And spoiler alert, there's no such thing as a magic genie. Okay, we're not going to have it. It's cool to think about, but they're not going to have it. But the older I've gotten since I watched Aladdin all the time, I've learned something. Although we don't have magic genies, I've learned that a lot of us approach God that way. When all of a sudden we get in a bind of some sort, all of a sudden we pray harder than we've ever prayed before. There's an unexpected debt, and all of a sudden we expect that God will just solve it. A moment in life that we weren't prepared for, and all of a sudden we're on our knees and we are praying that God will step in. And it seems as though that our relationship with God sometimes is just built on our want instead of who He is. And sometimes we come to Jesus as though He's genie. Jesus, I need you here, I need you here, I need you to do this, I need you to do this. And it's almost as though we come with our wishes to Jesus. This morning, as we really look at who He is, I want us to ask the question, is this really the best approach? Is this, 1, really who He is, but 2, is it really the way that we should approach Jesus? Week 1 is Jesus' leader and that we are followers. Week 2 is Jesus' grace, and that we've been given a second chance. Week 3 is that Jesus is healer, and that hurt does not last forever. And as Jesus gives us leadership and gives us grace and heals our hurts, we learn through all of those, as well as today, that Jesus is provider. Jesus is provider. If you brought a Bible, so we're going to go ahead and open up to John chapter 6. John chapter 6, we're in the New Testament, looking at Jesus' life, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and then John. John chapter 6, we come in contact with Jesus, and he is wanting to spend time with his disciples, the guys that travel around with him, the guys that are closest with him. As we pick up with Jesus right here, Jesus has had a little bit of a stressful week. John the Baptist, his best friend, has just been beheaded. And so that kind of puts a damper on the week. He went to his hometown, and while he was there, the place where he grew up, no one gives him any respect. No one gives him any honor at all, and so he's kind of disgraced in his hometown. Just a busy week. He sent his disciples off to the nearby towns and villages and told them, you go and preach and you go and teach who I am. And so he's been by himself for a little bit. And the disciples, they come back from all of this, and they are excited to tell Jesus about what happened. And they're excited with the news of the things that happened while they were in these towns. Except, while they're excited, they can't find a spot to sit down with Jesus and talk because there are crowds everywhere. You see, Jesus is well known at this time period, and so they know there are people coming to Jesus. Hey, will you heal this person? Hey, Jesus, will you teach it? You know, all of these things. So there's always a crowd there. And so finally they decide, hey, the best thing for us to do is to jump in this boat. And so they jump in the boat and they begin to move through the Sea of Galilee. And they decide that they're just going to move upshore. And while they're in the boat, and then when they get up to where they're going, then they'll have time to sit and talk about what's taking place. John chapter 6, beginning in verse 1. Some time after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee. That was the Sea of Tiberias. And a great crowd of people followed him, because they saw the miraculous signs he had performed on the sick. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside, sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover feast was near. When Jesus looked up, he saw a great crowd coming toward him. He said to Philip, where should we buy bread for these people to eat? He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 8 months' wages was not enough to buy bread for each one to even have a bite. Another of the disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. Here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will that go among so many? Jesus said, have the people sit down. There was plenty of grass in that place, and the men sat down, about 5,000 of them. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. When they all had had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted. So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. After the people saw the miraculous sign that Jesus did, they began to say, surely this is the prophet who has come into the world. Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to the mountainside to be by himself. And Jesus finds himself with his disciples, just wanting to spend time. This record of Jesus' life, the feeding of the 5,000 people, it's recorded in all of the Gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all have this story in it. And as we place all of those together, we get the full picture of the event that took place. As Jesus, as he gets off the boat, one of the record, he says he looks out in the crowd. And I don't know about you, but if it was me, if I had just had a stressful week, if I had not had time to spend, if I had not had any time to spend with some of my closest friends, if I just wanted a minute of peace and quiet, if I get in the boat and I set off, I get there, and there's still a crowd of people there, part of my thinking is, man, just give me a minute. Just a few minutes, let me catch my breath. But in one record, it says Jesus looked on the crowd and had compassion on them. Had compassion on them. We find a little more detail in one of the other records where it says that the crowd who knew who Jesus was, they ran along the shore. Like they ran alongside the lake through these towns, getting more and more people. And so the people that left him on one side, they moved around in order to meet him on the other side because they so much want to be around Jesus. So he gets off the boat, goes up on this mountainside. He begins to teach them who he is, and he begins to preach to them. After a while, he recognizes, man, these guys, they look hungry. The disciples, they recognize, these guys are hungry. And so the disciples, they begin to throw out different ideas of how they're going to solve this. Because when they look out at the crowd, they see 5,000 men. And here in a minute, we're going to learn at least there's children and probably women there too. And so this crowd is bigger than just 5,000. There's 5,000 men. What are we going to do with all of these people? And one suggestion is thrown out there where Jesus says to Philip, hey, how are we going to buy bread from them? And Philip's like, buy bread? What are you talking about? I mean, that's 8 months' wages. I mean, it's a ton of money just to give these people a bite. I mean, not even a meal, a bite. So, I mean, that really doesn't work. They see the size of the crowd. They see how big the magnitude of people in front of them. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people sitting in front of them. And they're posing the question, they're hungry. Why don't you give them something to eat? And their reaction is what? Doubt. Doubt. They begin to question, well, we can't buy them food. One of the other Gospels, and it says that one of the ideas is that they would send them out to the nearby villages to get something to eat. Well, that's really not an option either. I mean, there's not enough food courts in that area to feed all of these thousands of people. And so that really doesn't work. They see the size of the crowd, the magnitude of the crowd. And even though Jesus is sitting right there next to them, they still are filled with doubt. They still don't understand how all these people could have it. And probably most of us in life, we don't every day sit on the side of a mountainside looking at thousands and thousands of people. However, we all have a crowd in our life that causes doubt. In all of our lives, there is a situation that we look at and we say, man, this has grown so big that I don't even know if God, who's sitting right here next to me, can handle it. Maybe it's a financial debt in life or multiple debts that just continues to grow and grow and grow. It seems like you get a little bit of handle on it, something else pops up, and you just begin to think, this is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and I don't know what I'm going to do. It's grown so big that I don't even know how God's going to step in and handle this. Maybe it's an unbelieving relative. Someone in your family who for years and years and years has just dogged the church and thought that following Jesus is completely unrealistic. For years and years and years, it's just broken your heart that they have no love for Jesus and no love for the church. And after years and years and years, you just wonder, are they ever going to believe? Are they ever going to understand? Maybe for you it's the child that you pray for and you pray for and you pray for and it just doesn't happen. And you say that you're going to trust and you say that you're going to believe that God has things in control, and you pray and you pray and you pray and it still just doesn't happen, and you begin to wonder, is God really here? Is he hearing my prayers? It's this crowd that causes doubt. Maybe it's just looking at society. And we look at society and say, man, this is going wrong, and this is going wrong, and this is going wrong. And I mean, there's this view out here, there's this view out here, and this is happening here. And you just watch the news and you think, this crowd is just so big. I don't know. I mean, does God have a handle on this? What's going on? And maybe it's not a meal that you're having to feed, but maybe it's this crowd of this situation in life that's just causing this doubt in your life. The same place that the disciples are sitting and they look at this crowd, they say, wait a minute, it's too big. We can't buy them food. We can't send them off. Now, this morning, what crowd of doubt stands in between God's provision and our belief? What's that situation that stands in between God taking care of it and us believing that he can? For them, it was the number of people. You see, the disciples, they're looking at all these different ways that they can solve it. Well, we could buy them food. We could buy everybody bread. But that would cost this much. So that doesn't work. They have this expectation that, well, maybe we can send them off to go eat and then come back. And that's an expectation that we can have to feed them. But I mean, that really doesn't look like it'll work out. So then they find this little boy, and this little boy, he's got just this brown paper bag lunch that his mom sent with him. Mom, can I go listen to that Jesus guy talk? Yeah, sure, go ahead, take the lunch with you. And so he follows the crowd, and he sits down, he's got this brown bag lunch, and the top of the bag is all torn and crumpled up because he's been fidgeting with it the whole time Jesus is talking. And he kind of peels it open, and he said, well, there's 5 loaves of barley bread, and there's 2 fish. Okay, and in my adult mind, knowing what's taking place, reading the rest of the story, in my mind, I think, and even based on what we see in like children's book, it's like these 5 mounding loaves, like these giant loaves that they like tear apart handfuls and pass out. And then there's like these 2 king salmon that they just, and pass it out. But let's be real, okay? What little boy ever comes into the school lunchroom with like 5 loaves and 2 king salmon? Okay, no kid ever. All right, no. This little kid brings 5 little pieces of bread and 2 sardines. That's his lunch. Realistic to what's taking place. 2 sardines, 2 little pieces, or 5 little pieces of bread. And it's almost as though the disciples are like, yeah, well, we got this lunch, but I mean, look at the crowd. How far is that really going to go? It's almost like there's a sarcastic undertone, like, really? Yeah, we got this, but that's not going to do anything. And the disciples are so busy looking at how they will provide in the situation that they miss out on how Jesus already is. Have you ever been there? Have you ever been so busy telling Jesus how he's going to answer your prayer that you miss out on how he already is? Last week was Valentine's Day. And for Valentine's Day, Emily and I, we were packing the kids' lunches. It was Emily's idea. We decided that we were going to try to find things to put in their lunch for that day that was in the shape of a heart. And so Emily has a heart cookie cutter, so we made their sandwiches and cut in the shape of a heart. Okay? And then we're trying to find other things, and the kids like eating cheese, and so we decided we were going to cut the cheese in the shape of hearts. I know, isn't that cute? We're going to cut the cheese in the shape of hearts, and try to find all these other things. So we finished the meal up and put it in the fridge. Next day, we didn't say anything to them, but we just gave them their lunch and sent them to school or whatever. We pick them up from school, and Reagan, how was your day? And to ask Levi, who's good. He's not going to give you much of an answer. So I say to Reagan, how was your lunch? Because if I'd say that to Levi, did you like your lunch? Yeah. He might even notice it was hard, so he's like, oh, food, yeah. And that was the end of it. But Reagan, she would notice that, everything was hard. And so I said to Reagan, how was your lunch? And we were both sitting there, and in my mind, I had this great expectation. Just going to be like, Dad, I opened my lunchbox, and everything was a heart for Valentine's Day, and it was so special that you did that, and I just love you so much. And I just had this expectation in my head that it was going to be, just this precious family bonding. But, we did that because we love you, Reagan, and all this other stuff. And so I said, Reagan, how was your lunch? With this expectation in my head, you know what I got? Dad, I really wanted a hot dog today. Are you kidding me? You know how long your mom, with great craftsmanship, carved both tops of the heart, and all you wanted was a hot dog? What? We do the same thing. We do the same thing. We spend so much time expecting that this is how God will respond, that all the while he's over here, he's like, man, here's a hot dog. And we completely miss out when God has already stepped into the situation because we're so busy telling him where to stand. The disciples, they completely missed the fact that God has already provided the meal for thousands because they were spending time trying to solve it on their own. Spending time trying to solve it on their own. So finally, Jesus is like, all right, I sit in front back. He's like, have everyone sit down. One of the other Gospels, it says, have them sit down in groups of 50. It always has amazed me. As a person who does not excel in math, it always has amazed me that Jesus just looks out at the crowd and he's like, yeah, 50 is the best way to divide it. Like, does Jesus have some accountant disciple out here to the side? No, he doesn't. He just looks at the crowd. He's like, have them split up in groups of 50. And so the guys split up. The 5,000 men, they split up in groups of 50. They sit down. Okay, Jesus prays for the meal. And, I mean, as a person who enjoys food myself, it drives me nuts that in something that's recorded in every single one of the Gospels, we get no details of the meal. Like, here's what you're going to eat. They collected the leftovers. Come on, Jesus, give me something here in the middle. Like, what was it like when the disciple reached in the basket for the 400th time and still pulled out a handful of bread? Like, what was it like for guy number 4,999 to get more fish than the guy who was number 1? Like, what was that like? And not even that. It wasn't like they just like shelled out a little bit like, oh, you get this little tiny piece of sardine and this one crab. No, it's just they ate until they were satisfied. They had a feast. It was not just this little, lunchable meal that you're still hungry after you're done. It was this giant feast that they have on the hillside. They ate until they were satisfied. And then Jesus says, hey, why don't you go walk through the crowd and pick up the leftovers because we don't want to waste anything. One brown bag lunch turns into leftovers for a crowd of 5,000 plus. And it was at that moment, as the disciples picked up the extra baskets and sat down next to Jesus, that they learned that Jesus is provider. Jesus is provider. And as they stood and they looked at the crowd that was now satisfied and full, they also learned this, that Jesus provides as we pursue. Jesus provides as we pursue. What happened when the disciples were trying to figure out how to buy food for everyone? They got nowhere. What happens when the disciples were trying to figure out how they could send people to all of the towns to get something to eat? They got nowhere. What happened when the disciples turned and looked at Jesus and began to pursue him? A crowd of people got fed. Jesus provides when we pursue. Growing up, I remember about a month and a half before Christmas time every year, my mom would say to me, she would say to me and Wendy, she said, you guys need to make a list for Santa. And to me, that meant like dream world, okay? And so I sat down, and I had my piece of paper, and I sat down with like the newspaper ads, and I'm writing down like cars and refrigerators and like the biggest thing that you can see on this list. I break open the Toys R Us ad and I'm just like listing things off. I come up with this whole laundry list of things that I want for Christmas. And so I give it to my mom. She's like, oh, I'm even writing down like ads, like, this right here, this is in this ad, and so just to help them out, I just wanted to help Santa out a little bit. And so I'm writing all of these things down, this whole list, give it to my mom. She goes, oh, I'll make sure to give this to Santa. I was like, okay, great. And so I go into Christmas morning with this expectation that, I'm going to come downstairs and it's like I'm going to be walking into Best Buy or walking into Toys R Us. It's like this whole wall of everything that was on your list. I walked downstairs and then, it was more than what I needed under the tree. I'd rip open everything and there was, this and that. And it was normally one big thing off of my giant list of 400 big things. And my mom would always say to me, looks like Santa provided what you needed. Like, listen, I'm going to take a Santa definition of need. Okay, I'm missing a few things on my list, but whatever. You should always say, looks like Santa provided what you need. Looking back on it, I had this expectation of all of these things. That Santa was going to provide me because this is what I wanted. But he provided me what I needed. Maybe sometimes even when I didn't need what I was blessed with. And we need to be real careful when we understand that Jesus is provider, that Jesus is not a genie. And there are preachers, there are churches across the United States that will stand up and say, hey, if you just ask Jesus for it, he'll give it to you. Pray hard enough, he'll give it to you. And that's a joke. Jesus will bless us. And Jesus provides for us as we pursue him. But he gives us what we need and not what we want. You see, Jesus' provision is not based on what we want and our plan, but his will and his person. And we need to stop basing whether or not Jesus provides on whether or not it satisfies us. And Jesus provides for our needs. There was thousands and thousands of people that walked away from a hillside, from a mountainside, with full stomachs. And I imagine some of them, hey, what's for lunch? Sardines and crackers. Really? I mean, what about steaks and fries? How come a little kid didn't have steak leftovers? It wasn't what they wanted, it was what they needed. As Jesus provides, as we pursue Him, as we begin to trust Him, as we begin to follow Him, Jesus will be there, and He will show us who He is as He provides for us. But we just don't get all the wishes that we want. We get Him. And getting Him should be more than we ever want. Jesus provides as we pursue. This morning, church, are you standing in the shoes of the disciples? Or you're more or less a doubting disciple? How can God ever handle this? How can He ever take care of this? Is He big enough to handle this crowd? Or are you standing over here in the shoes of a little boy, holding your lunch, saying, this is what I have to give? And I trust that He'll take care of it. Are we trying to solve the crowd situation on our own? Or are we pursuing Jesus to provide the answer? This morning, I don't know what your crowd looks like. I don't know what the situation is that's causing doubt. But Jesus is provider, and He will provide for us as we consistently pursue Him. Jesus. The disciples, they didn't see how You had already taken care of things. Jesus, we look at You standing on a hillside with a group of people who were hungry, who needed something to eat. And many of us, we see ourselves standing in the shoes of the disciple, or just trying to figure things out on our own. How can we solve the crowd ourselves? And Jesus, I pray that if that's us this morning, I pray that if that's us this morning, that we will turn and we will begin to pursue You. And we will stop trying to solve all of these situations on our own. Because it wasn't until the disciples turned and looked at You that people were fed. And God, there are situations in our life that we will not find any answer until we turn and look to You. And then You will provide. Jesus, we understand this morning that You're not some genie who's just going to rain down all of this stuff on us if we ask for it. But we do know that You have called us to ask and to seek You and to pursue You. And as we do, that You will provide for us. And that at times You will bless us far more than we deserve. Jesus, we see this most as You stepped upon a cross. And You surrendered Your life to give us life. You provided us a second chance to come back to You, to get rid of this sin, to get rid of this mess in our life. And Jesus, I pray today that we stop trying to look at all these different ways and that we begin to pursue You, the giver of life. That You are the provider. That You are the one who gives us life, meets the needs in our life. Jesus, help us to pursue You more than anything else. It's in Your name we praise. Amen.